Good morning, Pa. Sorry if I sound a little funky. I think my wife's head cold has finally caught up to me. It's not super bad, but it is a thing. But let's keep going. Key to the Keystone, huh? All right. Player 3 has entered the game, because we were talking about how we could triangulate documents to show its proof. The hegemonic rule of the Bible has been challenged of late by the emergence of hundreds of other ancient documents from the Bible's historical and social world. Suddenly there's a flood of books claiming to be contemporaries with the ancient books of the Bible. Sometimes these books are ascribed to the same writers who are believed to have written the Old Testament. Sometimes the words these books contain sharply disagree with the text of the Old Testament. Unlike Joseph Smith Jr., we now have literally at our fingertips scores of ancient books to use in paleographic analysis of the Book of Mormon. When the Book of Mormon was published, no one knew about the Armenian Testament of Adam, or the Old Slavonic creation of the heavens and the earth, and the divine investiture of St. Michael. In the mid-19th century, a flurry of lost books began to appear. These books claimed to be from the time of Christ, or Jeremiah, or Moses, or even Adam. They claimed to cover the same time as the books of the traditional Bible. They told some of the same stories with different emphasis and new information. They told new stories and previously unknown visions. Their doctrines were sometimes traditional and predictable, but sometimes wild, contradicting what Bible believers had previously understood. The lost books offered an alternate version to the accepted biblical narrative. Just take the account of the fall of Adam from the first 3 chapters of Genesis. The Genesis fall account suddenly saw an army of competitors. The Greek Life of Adam and Eve, translated in 1866. Then the Latin Vita Adae et Evae in 1878. The Slavonic Yehithai Adamai Yevai in 1893. The Armenian Zygyum Adami in 1981. The Georgian in the mid-20th century, the Coptic version in 1975, several more Armenian accounts published in 2012, and the Copto-Arabic Adam version, which vanished in 1997, having never been fully translated. That's sad they were missing that one. That's just the first 3 chapters of the Bible. These new discoveries came from many different places. Some came from clay pots buried in the sands of Egypt, as if in an Indiana Jones film. Some of them came from ancient manuscripts inside the tombs, the dusty tombs, and forgotten monasteries, like Indiana Jones might find, and some of them came from secret documents locked in vaults of collectors or museums, just like just like Indiana Jones. Look, it's basically Indiana Jones. And this footnote for that says they also found some consecrated rubbish bins inside synagogues. Technically, such a thing is a geniza, and others in heaps of bat guano. Wow. And just like Indiana Jones, all along the way, suit-wearing bureaucrats smoking pipes and holding monocles said that these new documents were myths and forgeries. They derisively called them the apocrypha. First, some definitions. The word apocrypha means hidden away. It doesn't only mean the Deuterocanon that was ripped out of the Bible by the Protestants. It doesn't mean only the Nag Hammadi texts. It doesn't mean only documents that came out of the Vatican Library. It means any and all of those religious texts that have been hidden away. Pseudepigraphic books, Gnostic books, even liturgical tradition are all fair game. If it is extra-biblical, maligned by credists, banned by state churches, mocked by scholars, or criminally neglected by Latter-day Saints, then we will here call it apocrypha. No matter what, they are called the learned men will laugh at them. No matter how ridiculed the apocrypha have been, it's nothing compared to what the Book of Mormon endures daily. There aren't lines of protesters outside the shrine of the book with picket signs mocking and shouting at patrons that the Dead Sea Scrolls are cult pills. There aren't documents made by Christian pastors devoted to caricaturing and warring against the Armenian monastery in Yerevan, where the books of Adam and Eve are kept. But the established doctors and lawyers and pastors hate the Apocrypha for the same reason they hate the Book of Mormon, because their world was built upon the canon. The only reason they aren't making grotesque cartoon parodies of the books of Enoch is that they don't see them as a threat to their cushy ministries. The biblical canon is widely revered as a solid mass, a complete composition, an almost sentient self-creation, a hip-hop album that dropped at midnight on Sinai, full of unblemished music of the spheres and perfect forevermore, or a creature like Adam who had a life breathed into him by God himself. But honest scholars know that if the Bible is like a creature, then it most closely resembles the monster of Dr. Frankenstein, cobbled together from unmarked and unknown graves and stitched together in lurching, sometimes gruesome imitation of an organic creature in order to satisfy the ambitions of its zealous and reckless engineers. The Bible is a collection of books from different places and different people with different purposes. Even the word Bible comes from the Greek biblia, meaning books, plural. Essentially, the Bible is the scriptural greatest hits as determined by post-exilic Jewish scribes in the case of the Old Testament, and early Roman Catholic authorities in case of the New Testament. B.H. Roberts puts it more eloquently when he said, I like the Frankenstein allegory, but B.H. Roberts put it more eloquently when he said, these books that you have bound up and that you call the Word of God, Holy Bible, were sifted out by consensus of opinion in the churches running through several hundred years. They endured the test of time, but the great bulk of that which was uttered and written even by apostles and prominent servants of God in the primitive Christian church, the church rejected, and out of the mass of chaff preserved these scriptures, the New Testament. We are here to re-examine that discarded chaff. Modern readers often suppose the biblical canonizers throughout, like us, and shared common... Let me read that again. Modern readers often suppose the biblical canonizers thought like us and shared common values with us, but they didn't. We imagine Mary and Martha sitting content at Jesus' feet with leather-bound holy Bibles on their laps. But no one in Jesus' day had a Bible, or anything close to it. The Bible wouldn't be compiled until centuries later, and even then only a tiny fraction of the populace would ever read it or be able to read it. Popular biblical literacy only became a thing in the past few centuries. Popular notions about biblical Christianity are younger than Pepsi Cola. Back 2 millennia ago, before Pepsi, certain books were approved and others rejected. This dodgy process of pass-failing tests didn't happen all at once and wasn't completed by a coherent group of people acting as a committee. Many debates were held over time. Sometimes debates were settled by violence. Constantine killed Irenaeus. Diocletian killed Donatists, and the Catholic and Protestants killed each other. Heck, even Santa Claus punched Arius in the face. At the Council of Nicaea, Bishop Arius contended so passionately and effectively against the Trinity that a not-so-jolly St. Nicholas walked across the room and smacked him in the face. Yes, really. It was a rough road. Eventually, a literary Frankenstein's monster lurched to life. It was called the Bible. And unbeknownst to most people, a pile of scrap limbs was discarded down the garbage chute. These rejects included books that none of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century church fathers liked, books that some liked and some didn't, and even immensely popular books that only missed being in the Bible by the skin of their teeth, like the Shepherd of Hermas and 1st Enoch. These are the rejected books that sit at the lonely lunch table every day with the Book of Mormon. These outcasts were cast out because they offended delicate egos or endangered lucrative careers. Professional party poopers. No sooner were these texts rediscovered than scholars got to work discrediting them. They pointed to what they called anachronisms as proof that the documents were at best perversions and at worst complete forgeries. For example, commenting on the Syrian Testament of Adam, S.E. Robertson writes, "The Testament is familiar with the Christian traditions found in the New Testament, and must therefore be dated after, say, AD 100. But the document itself claims to have been written centuries earlier. No matter, the scholars say, any traces of Christian traditions must, therefore, date the document well after the text itself states. The author of the text can claim whatever he wants, but if a book contains elements that don't fit the critic's preconceptions about what the ancient Hebrews believed, then it must be from the Christian era." Robinson gives away the game in his statement above. The dating of the Testament of Adam, or any text for that matter, is based purely on how the perceived content fits in the scholar's own mental timeline. Robinson thinks there was no Christianity before 100 AD, so any statement that sounds even vaguely Christian can't be older than that. His rule isn't even that a Hebrew text must be consistent with the content of the Old Testament to be authentic. That would be bad enough, because it would make the Bible out to be the exhaustive, conclusive, omniscient judge. Worse, Robinson's rule is that a Hebrew text must be consistent with S.E. Robinson's understanding of the ancient world. The late Dr. Robinson is quite a down-to-earth scholar who also accepted the Book of Mormon, yet he was reciting the catechism of his discipline. It makes his assessment all the more demonstrative of his stubborn paradigm. So, not a bad guy, but stuck in a paradigm. Take another example of an apocryphal work, the Vision of Ezra, with manuscripts located in the Vatican written about around 1100 AD. Listen to how the scholars J.R. Mueller and G.A. Robbins explain their estimation on the date for the Vision of Ezra. Given the numerous allusions to the New Testament, especially the Herod episode, verses 37 through 39, the earliest possible date would be the late 1st century AD. While no liturgy dependence needs to be postulated, the vision certainly shares the zeitgeist ethos of the era, the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. For these reasons, the Greek original of the Vision of Ezra, whose Latin translation assured it an important role in later medieval literature, should probably be dated from AD 350 to 600. In other words, we have no idea when to date this text, but it kind of sounds to us like the writings from a certain era, so we'll assume it's also from that era. There you go. That's how they date documents. That's how the sausage is made. The elephant in the room is that scholars actually have no hard scientific way of dating the content of the documents. We all assume there's, some kind of lab or beaker or microscope that can reveal definitely when a document was written. But that's a myth. One false hope for authenticating ancient books is radiocarbon dating, which many people assume should be able to date these mysterious discoveries. Science, right? Objective facts. But radiocarbon dating only gives a year for the parchment or other physical objects tested, not the actual contents. You can't carbon date words or ideas. That's confusing the medium and the message. That'd be like trying to fix a date on a song by using the manufacturing date of the headphones it's played on. If your iPhone is playing Elvis, then these academics would say Elvis wrote Hound Dog in 2024. In fact, he didn't write it at all. It was written by Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller and was recorded by Big Mama Thornton before Elvis ever got his hands on it. The only dating method available is what the scholars referenced above are doing, called historical manuscript dating, or HMD. HMD is academic speak for reading and comparing. It means dating a document by historical situations the document seems to refer to, or with reference to people or places named in the text. It relies on the scholar having the same understanding about the historical situation as the author of the text. In fact, not just a situation, but all historical situations, because HMD assumes that the scholar employing it is aware of all relevant historical scenarios. HMD also assumes that no one has tampered with the names in the text during transmission. It's essentially educated guessing. The discovery of the apocrypha caught the academic world with no answers. These ancient writings descended like hail on the academic picnic, and no beaker, microscope, or radiocarbon dating could come save them. The counter-strategy of the intelligentsia has generally been to speak with such confidence that no one looks behind the curtain. Yeah, probably. Using historical manuscript dating, scholars beautifully dismiss the other apocryphal accounts relating to Genesis as forgeries, since they contained themes that were anachronistic. In other words, these books all purport to record events that involved Adam and Eve, Melchizedek, Enoch, Abraham, etc., but they also mention Christian-sounding doctrines, like baptism, the resurrection, or the Messiah. Since scholars have predetermined that these doctrines are exclusively Christian, that Christian doctrines are only possible after 100 AD, and these documents are simple interpolations or fakes. For examples, see McNamara, page 105, also Vanderkamp, page 100 to 101, where he concludes the same. It is debatable whether the testaments of the 12 patriarchs should be included in a book about the Second Temple period, because, as it now exists, it is clearly a Christian work, although almost all of it reads like a Jewish composition. A series of passages have been identified as Christian in origin, some of them more obviously than others. Furthermore, M.R. James builds on the same assumption when dating the apocalypse of Elijah, but neither the extant apocalypses can be supposed to represent the old book faithfully. Yep. That's what they're doing. The scholar pats themselves on the back and go on writing dissertations on whether or not Shakespeare was gay. This slipshod game has caused some big problems, like in the case of the Testament of Naphtali. And the Testament of Naphtali was disparaged as mere Christian forgery for nearly 4 centuries by the critical methods of the Reformation. The Testament is a deathbed prophecy from Naphtali, the son of Jacob, who lived around 1700 BC. In the book, Naphtali predicts the scattering of his tribe and the coming of a man working righteousness and working mercy, whom he calls the compassion of the Lord. What romantic drivel, hinting at the Messiah before the Christ? What silly forgery, probably cooked up in the 15th century by some incorrigible huckster, not unlike Joseph Smith Jr., and his Book of Mormon, and its shameless pretensions to antiquity. This was the prevailing attitude towards the Testament of Naphtali for 400 years, until a copy of Naphtali was discovered buried with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Whoopsie! This new copy, along with the cache of scrolls found at Qumran, dates to around 100 BC. Note, the physical document dates to 100 BC. This means the previously rejected book was at least 1,500 years older than the established thought for centuries. This is just one example how scholars have had their silly circular reasoning blown up by delicious karma. And yet, the Qumran copiers weren't the original authors of the Testament of Naphtali. If the physical document dates to 100 BC, the ideas and words of Naphtali must still be older still. How old was the scroll from which Qumran scribes copied? What if they had a scroll from 1,600 years earlier? That would put the date of Naphtali's composition at exactly when it claims to have been written. Historical manuscript dating is a method dependent upon circular reasoning. It relies wholly on the comparison of one document to a body of others, or the scholar's idea of others. If 9 documents seem to say to me to, but one says to me to, but the other one says tomato, then tomato is filed in a hoax bin. When a second tomato document inevitably turns up, it's stamped as hoax and filed the same way. This goes on until there might be 20 tomato documents to just 9 tomato. But no one ever goes back to check on the bin of banished books. Essentially, we say, it's a hoax. If we say it is a hoax, then it is. Modern academics are in good company with the ancient canonizers, who also hated the apocrypha. The early Catholic fathers had their paychecks tied up in proving certain doctrines true and false, and those darn apocrypha threatened their business. In the 4th century AD, leaders from the state church saw the threat of these untamed books could pose, and wrote the Constitution of the Apostles, with a section, What Books of Scripture We Ought to Read. Before I read the quote, here is the academic dismissal 2-step. At the top it says, we found these books. They show pre-30 AD Christian themes. Next one says, no credible books show Christian themes before 30 AD. But these books do. But those aren't credible. Well, why not? What makes them credible? If they've conformed to what we found before. But now, we found these books, and they show the pre-30 AD Christian themes. No credible books show Christian themes before 30 AD, but these books do. But those aren't credible. Etc., etc. All right, now for the quote. What books of Scripture we ought to read? Quote, I don't know if that's a specific person or the verse number or something, but and then, or if thou stayest at home, read the books of the law of the kings with the prophets, sing the hymns of David, and pursue diligently the gospel, which is the completion of the other. That we ought to abstain from all the books of those that are out of the church. 6. Abstain from all the heathen books. For what hast thou to do with such foreign discourses, or laws, or false prophets, which subvert the faith of the unstable? For what defect dost thou find in the law of God, that thou shouldst have recourse to those heathenish fables? That is from Constitution of the Apostles, Section 5, edited by James Donaldson. You can find it on www.ewtn.com/Catholicism/library/access to July 4th, 2024. So, there it is. In a delicious twist of irony, the Constitution of the Apostles was rejected in 692 by the Council of Trullo. It is now considered apocryphal. Many apocryphal writings claim that the Messiah was clearly and thoroughly preached before 0 AD, but when given the choice between the corpus of apocryphal writings and the traditional canon, scholars always base their judgments on the canon. Like Howe said, these apocryphal books could only be true if there has been a great deficiency in the record. Or, as Hugh Nibley said, to acknowledge the pre-Christian messianic texts is akin to admitting bankruptcy. Yet that bankruptcy, as witnessed by the Book of Mormon and the Apocrypha, is precisely what the brass plates prove. Asking the canon to confirm the Apocrypha is like asking a realtor, tell me all the reasons I shouldn't buy this house from you. Or saying it to a defense attorney, tell me all the reasons you think your client totally did it. Or asking a politician, here, let me read your emails. Why are we shocked when the canon doesn't support the Apocrypha? Why is this surprising? How often are we scolded, those books don't conform to the canon, don't you know? Well, yes, obviously, that's why they are what they are. We're not wondering if they're in the canon or not, we're wondering why. Who made the decision, and were their motives as pure as the driven snow? When it comes to the canonizers, we don't just take their word for it. We don't even know who they were. The academics and cretists agree. Don't ask how the sausage was made, just eat it. Latter-day Apocryphites. The Book of Mormon teaches Christian themes centuries before the advent of Jesus Christ, and it's unceremoniously discarded because everyone knows that Christian themes must be exclusively limited to the post-Christian era. The boy Joe Smith made a rookie mistake in 1829, and that's that. And the Ivy League grant money keeps flowing. More champagne, anyone? But Joseph Smith Jr.'s declaration was bigger than claiming that Christian ideas preceded Christ. He unapologetically claimed that Christianity, with all its elements, had been preached since Adam. The Book of Mormon doesn't say that the prophets gave little symbols or hints, or wrote poems giving clues about the Messiah, but the prophets penned giant, glaring declarations about his name, his birthplace, his miracles, and his mission. If Joseph is right, then all the justifications for rejecting the Apocrypha must be revisited. Latter-day Saints cannot accept the scholars' categories or dates or dismissals. The Apocrypha should be re-examined, unfettered from the Old Testament. Let a third contender into the ring. Since the Book of Mormon came at the start of the apocryphal downpour, Latter-day Saints were early deviants who dared flirt with forbidden texts. Starting with Joseph's vision in 1820, the genesis of Mormonism was the Lord tearing down the curtain on the cretists. Joseph boldly defied the canonical keepers of his day. He wrote in the Doctrine and Covenants, "Seek ye out of the best books words of wisdom. Seek learning, even by study, and also by faith." D&C 118. Defiant Joseph penned a letter from Liberty Jail, quote, "The first and fundamental principle of our holy religion is that we believe that we might have the right to embrace all and every item of truth without limitation or without being circumscribed or prohibited by the creeds or superstitious notions of men or by the denominations of one another." If that's not an invitation to study the lost books, then what is? The early saints were excited to pick through the banned bin. When rumors were spreading about the Book of Jasher, Joseph Smith wrote in December 1830, "Much conjecture and conversation frequently occur among the saints concerning the books mentioned and referred to in various places in the Old and New Testaments, which were now nowhere to be found." Oh, interesting. Contrast the fear of the canonizers and the academics with the courage of Joseph Smith. "I want the liberty of thinking and believing as I please. It feels so good not to be trammeled." Later, in 1833, Joseph still pined for the Apocrypha. "We have not found the Book of Jasher, nor any other of the lost books mentioned in the Bible as yet, nor will we obtain them at the present." Unlike the chiding cretists, Joseph looked forward to getting more Apocrypha someday. Joseph would live to see the first trickle of apocryphal truth in 1840. He obtained the Book of Jasher, saying that it will excite great interest among those who take pleasure in reading and studying the Scriptures. It is the Book of Jasher. It is full of interest and written with a warmth of piety and sacred devotion, worthy of taking an equal rank with any of the missing books, not strictly canonical. A few months later, a rumor floated across the ocean that the Ethiopic Book of Enoch was supposed for ages to have been lost and has been found. The Latter-day Saints Millennial Star periodical shows the saints' excitement. It steers clear of modern sectarianism and savors much of the doctrine of the ancients. The Latter-day Saints looked forward to the fulfillment of prophecy of Nephi, saying, "I beheld other books which came forth by the power of the Lamb." Even Russell M. Nelson, then a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, read from the apocryphal Discourse on Abaton in the April 2000 General Conference, commenting, "Although this book is not Scripture, it reaffirms Scriptures." Though rejected by the cretists, these books should find a comfortable home among the fearless Latter-day Saints. Finally, a second witness against which to test the Book of Mormon. If we let him in, prayer 3 doesn't hesitate. If we let him in, player 3 doesn't hesitate. He immediately sides with the Book of Mormon. The apocrypha line up with the brass plates in impossible ways Joseph Smith Jr. couldn't possibly have known nor guessed. Many of Joe Smith's anachronisms match apocryphal anachronisms and do so with uncanny precision. For instance, the first Book of Mormon prophet Lehi seems to take his inspiration for his unmatchable sermon on the fall from the rejected books of Adam and Eve. Nephi could have pulled his heroic inspiration not from Deuteronomy, but from the Assumption of Moses. Nephi also seems to share visions with the forgotten prophet Baruch. Alma and the armies of the Captain Moroni appear versed in the book of Jasher and the lost books of Enoch. But this isn't far enough. The Apocrypha aren't simply friends with the Book of Mormon. They are family. If Relative Race did an episode on the brass plates, they'd share a tearful reunion between the recently discovered Apocrypha and the Book of Mormon, discovering their shared and previously unknown father. If there was an old family photo of the Book of Mormon's family, we'd find apocryphal books all over the photo. We might not know exactly how they're related, but there's no denying certain features. The square jaw, the big knuckles, and the jauntily raised eyebrows all tell us these folks are kin. Like actual cousins, some of these books can tell us more about the Book of Mormon's origins than the Nephite authors ever revealed. Put another way, in 1829, the sky of Israelite literature was only lit by a few close-knit documents from the ancient world. The traditional canon was the center of the universe, but in the years since, faint clouds have drifted away to reveal a host of new twinkling apocrypha. Today, so many new documents are visible that formerly outcast Book of Mormon doesn't look so strange anymore. Time has revealed more data points, and data points now vindicate the long-dismissed claims of the Book of Mormon. And here you have a wonderful diagram. He has all the traditional canon in round dots, and the Book of Mormon way up here. Whereas with the new apocryphal documents, you can see that it seems to fit right in. I like his metaphors, I guess. Unmasking Mother Gothel. Although we just said the traditional canon isn't wrong per se, there are some hard truths that Rapunzel must face if she is to take back her true identity. Hard truths about her false mother. For Latter-day Saints, that's the Old Testament. A reconstructed version of the brass plates will also tell us volumes about the Old Testament and how it was created. The section, "This isn't the Messiah you're looking for," below reveals evidence about the corruption that has infiltrated the Old Testament. In the light of new understanding, some former heroes may become villains, like King Josiah, and some villains will become heroes, like Eve. In the end, the gospel of Jesus Christ shines through brighter than ever. To make up for stripping out the Messiah, the ancient canonizers apparently stacked the Old Testament with a god of their own making, the idol of the law. The Apocrypha agree with the Book of Mormon that the Old Testament has been scribified to exalt the Mosaic law above the corporeal Messiah. The family of Lehi set out with a totally different set of scriptures, with no Genesis, no Deuteronomy, no Samuel, no Kings, and no Psalms. Instead, they had, among other things, the unredacted words of Isaiah, Micah, Hanani, and as well as the lost prophecies of Joseph and the testaments of the 12 patriarchs. Once reconstructed, the brass plates will show us that the Old Testament was meticulously mangled by ancient scribes, like a toddler systematically smashing a birthday cake in his bare hands. What we read today in the Old Testament is a warped, false version of the gospel. Hence the need for a contingency plan, a solid metal contingency plan. The brass plates contain books and prophecies that escaped the editors in the late 6th century BC, and bequeathed to the Nephite peoples detailed predictions about Jesus, his birth, his parentage, his mission, and his victory over death. Excavating the first apostasy, or the Great Forsakening, reveals how perversions in the Old Testament affected the New Testament. the brass plates, and the Book of Mormon rescue Christianity not from one apostasy but two. John and Jesus tried establishing a new church, but the perverted canon made it all too easy for later Christians to slip right back into the quicksand of scribal malpractice. In light of these discoveries, our understanding of the mission of the Book of Mormon changes. No wonder the Book of Mormon seems too anachronistically Christian. No wonder it seems so non-Jewish. We'll see how Abinadi could seem to quote Paul a century before Paul was born. We'll understand why the Lord destroyed Jerusalem when he did. We'll learn why Laban's murder was the most consequential murder since Abel. When these apocryphal writings enter the ring, they turn the tables on the canonizers. The reigning champion, the Bible, in one corner, and in the other, the laughingstock, the Book of Mormon. The apocrypha somehow shimmy past the references, and under the ropes, reconstructing the brass plates record, will rewrite our understanding of the Book of Mormon's mission. We're going where scholars fear to tread. Angels don't fear to tread there. Actually, there are so many angels in this space, it's hard to keep them all straight. And not all of them have feet. We're reading books that used to get people exiled or executed. We're breaking the rules, skipping class with no hall pass and watching MTV. We're loitering in the no loitering space. We're playing our music too loud and tearing tags off the mattresses. Scores of monocled pinky-raising professors will chortle and chide and turn up their noses, but God chose the foolish things of the world to put the wise to shame. We're going to go back thousands of years in time, across the world, in a dozen languages, half of them forgotten, and we're going to hunt and fish the apocryphal truths and bring them out of the holes in the rocks. We're going to reconstruct the brass plates, the most important book in Mormonism, which no one has ever read. Before Joseph could get the precious plates, he had to wrestle with the Lord of Darkness. So too must we. And there is the QR code. That's Jonah Barnes, 100%. He's really fun. Oh, man. All right, so I wanted to actually go back and oh, shoot. He's really good at that. I'm excited because I've only read a few apocryphal texts because everyone was talking about Ezra's Eagle and how it conformed apparently to United States presidents, and there was an assumption that something was going to happen to Donald Trump. And it hasn't happened. They were thinking that it would happen before his presidency. But admittedly, one of the main guys who was pushing it said, okay, I got it wrong. I really got it wrong. I thought it would be specifically before his presidency. Obviously, that hasn't happened. So, in that sense, I was absolutely wrong, which I give him kudos for. That is hard to sit back and specifically call out where your assumptions were wrong. But he also says, well, there's still a lot in play, but we'll see what happens, which is also understandable. You don't want to give up on a good idea, but it probably will fade. So I read Ezra's Eagle, and I found it very interesting. And I can see where they got the idea that it was supposed to match certain presidents, but at the same time, there's not exactly something that specifically says which U.S. president to start on. So, who knows? Who knows? Maybe it is coming true, and it is Trump, but it's just not in the way that guy thought. So I read Ezra's Eagle, which was really interesting because the guy who has the vision, talk about piety. Dude, when I was reading that, it starts out with this guy who's like sleeping under a tree, and then he has this vision of a lady that he knew or knows, and she talks to him like in the sky, and well, she chides him at first because he had a little wanton thought, not much, mind you, just basically noting that she was pretty, and that was it. But she's like, come on, dude, you need to be better. And he's like, ah, and I was like, dang, there's like zero room for anything in his mind. I'm like, that is so different from the main body of uh, scriptures. You don't see people trying to be that pious, basically, especially in the Old Testament. There's all sorts of weird stuff there. But anyway, maybe it was too condemning to be that, to show an example of someone being that pious. I thought that was really interesting. And so I'm excited to see what Jonah Barnes brings to the table and what he quotes and such. Funny enough, one thing that I really wanted to talk about earlier as I was reading was after going through the last 116 pages in the language of Adam, and also especially having conversed, or not conversed, but having seen the podcasts with the lady who is working on the ancient Hebrew wedding ceremony. After all that information, I reread all of Revelations. It is so clear. It is insanely clear. The only times where it's like, okay, what does this mean? Comes down to the stuff that's in the Doctrine and Covenants, like the weird seraphim that are a lion, a calf, an eagle, and a man that have eyes all over its body and inside its body and stuff. And I was just like, what is that? And Joseph Smith is like, you're supposed to take it to mean that all the different creatures of the world, everything that runs or crawls or flies, everything is praising God. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Besides that weirdness being taken care of by Joseph Smith, I mean, there's weird timing with how things are stacked according to, the seals being opened, what we call the four horsemen of the apocalypse coming out, the different seals being undone, which, Joseph Smith was saying each seal represents about 1,000 years, that kind of deal. There's some weird timing, only because of, it's a vision. So you can sit there and go through this period and then go back and then, all right, let's do this. Like, here's all this woe and disparity and wrath being poured out, and then let's go back and start doing the seals and show how the seals being opened correspond to these things. There's a little bit of that. But the actual descriptions of Jesus Christ coming and having the stars in his hands and candles and such, I'm like, I know exactly what it's talking about. We're talking about he calls them the seven churches. But notice that it's seven churches and it's a sevenfold woman, but he's the bridegroom and the church is the bride, hence the symbols of women being associated with people in the church and the churches. And then him reprimanding the different churches and praising them praising and reprimanding them for the things they were doing good and doing wrong. And also all the other symbolism of the cloud when approaching the throne, Jesus Christ descending out of the Holy of Holies, being entered into the Holy of Holies. And also, they mention the tree of life, I think 2 or 3 times in Revelations, being in the Holy of Holies, in Revelations. So once you've got like that, if you want proof of how much these books have changed the DNA of how I read things, it is easy to see. Because what happened was I was listening to the end of the podcast stuff that they did for In the Language of Adam. And they talked about how these contents, the contents that they were ascribing to, the tree of life being a divine feminine figure, this would get you chased out, and this would get you murdered and killed. And that reminded me immediately of the woman with child in Revelations. And that's what made me go back and read it. And sure enough, like, it all makes so much sense. So if you haven't done it, spend a good hour or two of maybe less, depends on your reading stuff. But if you go through Revelations again, holy cow, it is plain as day now, like really plain. And I'm like, dude, this is insane. This is insane how plain everything is. So I can't wait to go back and read through the Old Testament and pick through the husk of what the scribes left behind unknowingly to see these same things. Like like the Tower of Babel likely being a temple. Because originally, like I said, I liked the idea that, oh, they were building a tower so they could sin how they wanted and not have to worry about the flood. But the problem is like, a tower that reaches heaven and making a name for yourself so you're not scattered sounds to me like they're trying to replace temple ceremonies and replace what God wanted. So I'm more inclined, but either way it's the same. I'm more inclined that they were trying to build a temple, but make it unto themselves instead of unto God. But either way, maybe I need to read more apocryphal stuff to figure out if the tower was literally a tower so they could avoid the flood. We'll find out. But holy cow. Yeah. Read Revelations again now that you've got in the language of Adam. And it is fascinating. Anyways, I love you lots, Pa. We'll see you around.